Lush, and I'm the executive editor at Hub Culture. Very pleased to be joined by Stan Stalnaker. Thanks for coming along.
Hi, Edie.
And also Michael Smith, Regeneration VC General Partner. So we're here to talk about the issue around data and climate. First of all, I want you to tell me, when did the climate crisis become a real thing for you?
I'm lucky enough to be from Santa Barbara, a place that's very active environmentally. So I've known about this issue for decades, but really didn't view it as a crisis until about 8 to 10 years ago, when I just saw the lack of momentum and frankly, the moving in the other direction over that time. And so decided to dedicate my life to that issue for myself, for my kids that I have, my family, the people I care about. So very motivated to address it.
So one of the issues within climate finance, within achieving the SDGs, is this idea around measurement. And this idea that if you can't measure it, you can't necessarily change it or set the right kind of targets. So give me the scale of the issue that you think we face at the moment within the data around climate.
This is the key issue, and one being discussed actively at COP in many different circles and many regulatory considerations, because the underlying data of how we measure CO2 equivalents, right? Methane has been a top discussion at this COP. The UN currently categorizes it as about 20 times the impact of CO2e,
Wow.
and science has it more like 80. And it's a short-lived greenhouse gas of 20 years versus this 100-year plus of CO2. So how do you think about different greenhouse gases? How do you think about that measurement piece? The science is evolving, the metrics are evolving, and that's okay. We're learning together, but it makes it challenging to make midterm, long-term investments in infrastructure, in new technologies, when the goalposts are always shifting and moving.
So I wonder, this data does start to exist places, and I know that people like Mark Carney are doing a lot of the big five accounting firms are doing a lot to bring this data out there. But it seems to still be siloed, is that right?
It's heavily siloed. It's expensive to derive the data. It's expensive to do this research. And thus, the companies that create this data, that pay to have it accounted, the countries, all these places, it's not really opened up widely yet in most cases. On the macro, it'll get shared, but maybe not specific examples that are very vital and useful that we can all learn from. And this is a real problem, right? Like, we need open coordination of what everyone is learning at every university, and then you have the issue of people doing the same work 100 different ways.
Right.
And that's madness. When you're in an emergency, it's not cute.
One person needs to carry the water.
We absolutely need to be growing and building off of each other's work.
Okay, so what are you doing about it? And then we're going to bring in Stan to see how Hub Culture might help as well.
Excellent. Yeah, so we at Regeneration are an early stage venture capital fund focused on the future of food, of apparel, of consumer products, the materials that go into them, the brands that use those materials, and what we do with them when we're finished, and how to give them a circular life. And we are thinking about, how do we measure the impact of our companies that we're investing in, the companies that we're looking at? How do we open up that information to other larger corporates that can learn from that can start to use those sorts of processes and what they're doing from a circular standpoint? And then how do we get coordination? And how do we upstream into the SDGs and into the multinationals and into the larger ESG conversation, which is also an active part of what we're talking about, underpinning the investment piece of this.
Stan, what is Hub Culture doing?
Well, we started talking with Regeneration about this topic months and months ago. It really goes back to some work that Michael had done even with the UN and the SDGs going back well before the pandemic, where they were involved with bringing together data sources and even a conference around data. But from our standpoint, I think what's really interesting, because we work in technology and we work so much in tokenization as well, there's an opportunity to merge some of the newer technologies with the idea of open source thinking and open source ethics to be able to begin to build a framework, or you could think of it like a container, to start to process this data. And so for me, the thing that really clicked in was speaking with Regeneration earlier in the year, and they had pointed out what Johns Hopkins has done. So one of the really interesting things is that a lot of this data actually lives within the university and academic sectors, and the universities actually like to hold that data, but they're also kind of nonprofits. So it's really valuable information, but it's not necessarily available. And then on the other side, you have companies like Bloomberg and Refinitiv, which are making a fortune on the data. And the thinking then becomes like, well, what about everybody else? There's a lot of other sources of data, and what if we could get a kind of collective, a coalition, a group together into an open source project? And to do that, you need a container. And so one of the things that we're talking about with these guys, and actually with all of our partners here, the government of Bermuda, which wants to be a climate finance hub, exchanges, blockchain companies that are working with us, what if we all came together and had a container that could begin to collect the data points? And so, oddly enough, APIs, which are like bits of kind of technical things, but essentially APIs allow things to work. You can think of like an API in the world of the internet like a socket. And if we can build a bucket for the sockets, then the sockets can start to link in, and then you can start to get harmonized data, you can start to get cross insights, that kind of thing. And I mentioned Johns Hopkins a minute ago. I find that really inspiring because we've seen it just happen with the pandemic. Johns Hopkins University, at the very beginning of the pandemic, launched an open source bucket, and everybody started putting the data in. And that's why today, when you go to Google or anywhere, where you're looking for COVID-related data, there's this kind of uniform system, right? So on top of the APIs, got built graphing and visualization, and then everybody started putting their data in, and the data is harmonious. I mean, it's not perfect, but at least there's something of a bucket. And because of this, we have pretty close to real-time data. We know every day how many new COVID cases are coming on the planet from like thousands of different reporting sources. What if we could do that for climate? That could even be, maybe an outcome from some of the things we've just learned from the last 2 years.
Right. So let me fast forward you to 2030, and we've achieved the Sustainable Development Goals. In the context of what we're talking about now, what does that look like for you, Michael?
I think what Stan is just, that near future vision he's just given is required for us to actually be able to achieve even close to what we're hoping to get out of the Sustainable Development Goals. It could guide all future activity, at the corporate level, in the philanthropic spheres, at the government level. It's something we would love to participate in, love to help build. But an open source approach, this tokenization, this blockchain approach is perfect for this use case. This is the best use case. And so, we're honored for the conversation and the partnership, and look forward to this work.
Great. Michael, Stan, thank you very much for being here with us in the ICE Hub in Glasgow.